Cao Cao was born in the year 155 in Chaoshen, in the area of Pei, today's Bozhou, in Anhui. According to records, his courtesy name was Meng De, but he was also known as Ji Li and Aman. Over 1,800 years have passed since then. Yet Cao Cao's association with this place is still strong, largely because his name is commemorated in the name of Taojiangkou Street in Bozhou. No one knows for sure exactly where he was born, but one thing's certain. He's remembered and talked about by people here to this very day. In winter 219, Sun Quan, ruler of the eastern region along the Yangtze River, wrote to Cao Cao, urging him to obey the will of heaven and ascend the throne. Far from being flattered by the suggestion, a long-faced Cao Cao showed the letter to his officials, saying that Sun Quan wanted to roast him. He was right to be suspicious. Not long afterwards, Sun Quan killed Guan Yu, a senior general of the Shu state, and sent his head to Luoyang, hoping to divert Liu Bei's anger towards Cao Cao. By that time, Cao Cao was terminally ill. After burying Guan Yu, the grief-stricken, mortally sick Cao Cao issued the last order. There's something poignantly banal about Cao Cao's last words. This hero, a mighty campaigner who had led his army for 30 years, was apparently preoccupied with trivia in his dying days. "After I die," he wrote, "I'd like to be buried in my usual clothes. I don't want to be buried with gold, silver, or jewelry. The maids and concubines have led hard lives, so please place them in the Tong Chuatai terrace and treat them well. The spices I have are very expensive. Don't burn them in sacrificial ceremonies, but give them to my consorts. My family members should learn to make shoes and shoelaces so that they can make a living in the future. My clothes should be shared by my brothers." On the 23rd day of the lunar month of the year 220, Cao Cao died in Luoyang. This lifelong warrior was 66 when he finally gave up his battle for life. Nearly 2,000 years later, on December 27, 2009, the Chinese archaeologists issued a shock announcement. The occupant of a tomb in Shikaoshua village in Aiyang, Hunan province, was confirmed to be Cao Cao. True to his last order, the objects excavated from the tomb confirm that his dying wish to be buried in simply style was respected.
他所有的随葬品的东西是一种薄葬的状态。我们讲薄葬状态呢，就是冥器是它都是放的都是冥器，所以说当时观众当时这个一公布了以后，大家都说你怎么处理还有猪圈呢？啊，什么还有出的那陶器呢？都是看着很不成样子，觉得曹操墓是吧，都应该出一些很好的一些东西，不是。
Both Cao Cao's The Last Order and Zhuge Liang's memorial on sending out the troops demonstrate that both leaders espoused frugality in life and death. Of the two texts, The Last Order is the least well known. Apart from their devotion of a simple, frugal living, the two men had something else in common. Both served as chancellor. But there the similarities end. While Zhuge Liang acquired an enduring reputation as an exemplary chancellor, Cao Cao came to epitomize the unscrupulous and treacherous schemer. Why?
关于曹操的评价呢，一直有争议。那个向代的舆论呢，总是把曹操当作一种枭雄或者奸雄，或者当作一个黑面的那个反面人物，包括一些戏曲啊、小说啊，经常是这么一个形象。其实，在历史学家的眼中啊，我们评价一个历史人物啊，就不要简单的说好或者坏，好人坏人，简单的说唯吾人、唯心人，这个简单方法是不可取的。那么我们在谈那个曹操的时候呢，最重要的就是要放到大的那个层面上去评价他。
In 174, 20-year-old Cao Cao began his official career as district captain of Luoyang. Coinciding with the end of the Eastern Han Dynasty, it wasn't an auspicious time to start a run-of-the-mill administrative career. But with the country descending into war and chaos, for men of action, there was plenty of opportunity to rise high. By 184, Cao Cao was a cavalry commander. Ordered to suppress the rebel army, he defeated them in Shandong, melding the best elements of his 300,000 captives into his Qingzhou army. Step by step, little by little, Cao Cao's military strength grew. In 196, Cao Cao invited Emperor Xian of Han to Shudu, today's Xujiang. With the emperor on side, his new career now began to take off. For the next 25 years, Cao Cao would be constantly campaigning. His first major triumph was the crushing of warlord Yuan Shu in Huainan. Next, he dealt with Yuan Shao in Hebei, then Liu Biao in Jingzhou, Han Sui in Liangzhou, and Zhang Lu in Hanzhong. Thanks to his efforts, order was re-established across northern China.
想治大半个中国， 他都实现了统一。那容易吗？我们现在我们说，如果说知文字作说纸上谈兵，那觉得那一句话的事。但是真正作为一个军事家，那真刀真枪，要想统一一个大半个中国，那是太不容易了。
An old steed in the stable still aspires to gallop 1,000 miles. Even the old still cherish high aspirations. This is a classic sentence from Cao Cao's masterpiece, Turtles Live Long. As well as the famous poems, he was responsible for many other writings, such as Order of Seeking Men of Talents, Order of Improving Public Customs, and Order of Internal Commandments. The one that intrigues historians the most is his autobiographical piece, in which he recalled the start of his career, his early military campaigns, and his pacification of northern China.
这一个你读起来有非常感人啊！他就是我为什么要出来呀？因为天下民不聊生呐，你不出来，我不出来，我不担当，你不担当，谁来担当吧？啊，然后我出来担当，别人肯定又说我可能怀有野心，那我顾不了这些了，那我就要出来担当。
像那样的话，一般人就不会说，是吧？假设这个国家没有我，那就不知道有多少人要称王称霸，那我把这些人都罩住了，啊。这些我们说口出狂言，但是恰恰反映这个曹操的个性。
What people didn't expect was that autobiographical piece of great historical value would trigger a nationwide sensation more than 1,700 years later. Between the New Year's Day and the Chinese New Year of 1959, Guo Moro, president of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and famous historian Jian Bozan successfully published Talking About Tai Wenji's 18 Songs on a Nomad Flute and Rehabilitation of Cao Cao's Reputation, from the Battle of Chebi to Cao Cao in the Guangming Daily. Then Guo Moro published the article Defending Cao Cao in the People's Daily and proposed to rehabilitate Cao Cao. This caused quite a stir. Guo Moro's evaluation of Cao Cao in his article immediately became a major talking point and provoked intense debate among historians. Standing on the opposite side of the debate was historian Tan Qishang, who published several articles about Cao Cao on Wenhui Daily. He wrote that Cao Cao had severe shortcomings as well as virtues, his achievements counterbalanced by crimes and mistakes. It was absurd to whitewash his reputation when the historical record painted a very different picture. But why did the evaluation of Cao Cao cause such heated debate more than 1,700 years after his death? To understand that, we need to look at the context within which Guo Moro wrote his re-evaluation of Cao Cao. A few decades earlier, during the Republic of China, a scholar named Liu Bi had written a 65-volume work titled Commentary on Records of the Three Kingdoms. Unfortunately, due to the Marco Polo Bridge incident, publication of the book was shelved. It was not until 1957 that this book was published.
三国志集解汇集了许多前人的成果，也有不少卢弼自己的议论。比如曹操有一篇叫《让县自明本志令》， 就说他自己如何的以小博大，以弱胜强。卢弼对此就批之道，说他是志骄气盈，言大而夸，并说他的整篇议论都是奸雄欺人之语。
In the summer of 1954, Mao Zedong came to Beidaihe and wrote a famous poem. Wielding his whip, the Emperor Wu of Wei rode eastward to Jiashu. His poem survives. Emperor Wu of Wei referred to Cao Cao. In just a few words, Mao Zedong evoked Cao Cao's epic ride to the coast. Four years later, when Mao Zedong read commentary on the records of the Three Kingdoms, he remarked that this explanatory note was not fair on Cao Cao and that many charges leveled at him were unwarranted. Mao Zedong's contribution to the debate triggered a wider discussion of how to evaluate Cao Cao and his legacy. In the first half of 1959 alone, more than 140 papers and reports related to Cao Cao were published in major newspapers and periodicals across the country. On the sunlit plain, trees can be counted one by one. On Parrot Islet, green grass grows fast and thick. This line is from Yellow Crane Tower, a poem written by Zhuge Liang, a poet from the Tang Dynasty. Throughout the ages, poets and men of letters have stood here and appreciated the great scenery of the Yangtze River, leaving behind many famous poems. In 758, 58-year-old Li Bai came here on his way into exile. Face to face with the vast river, his thoughts turned to a man from long ago who had died here in depression. It was Mi Hung, the man who once scolded Cao Cao in public. In a celebrated poem, Li Bai wrote that while Cao Cao, the ruler of the country, was broad-minded with a sense of the big picture, Mi Hung's view was a very narrow one, as limited as that of an ant on the ground. Though talented, Mi Hung's conceit and short-sightedness eventually proved his undoing.
毛主席在看到呢在读到《三国志集解》卢弼对于曹操这篇文章的批语之后呢他引用了李白的诗，说魏帝迎八极，以观亦弥衡此之尽也来把卢弼呢比作弥衡。
Mi Hung was a famous scholar in the Three Kingdoms period. Known for his arrogance, he feigned madness. Such was his talent that someone recommended him to Cao Cao, but it wasn't long before he affronted Cao Cao. So Cao Cao invited him to beat the drum at a banquet. Mi Hung's response was to beat the drum naked, thus publicly humiliating Cao Cao. Luckily for him, someone interceded on his behalf, persuading Cao Cao to forgive him. However, ever determined to bite the hand that feeds, Mi Hung scolded Cao Cao while battering the ground with a rod outside the camp. Enraged, Cao Cao wanted to kill him, but fearing accusations that he was intolerant of talented people, he opted to send Mi Hung to Liu Biao in Jingzhou. There he continued to exercise his talent for offending people and was eventually killed by one of Liu Biao's subordinates. This is a popular section of the Peking opera play, Beating the Drum while scolding Cao Cao. In the play, Mi Hung is depicted as an upright man who is not afraid of death and scolds the treacherous traitor, while Cao Cao, whose face is painted white, with his ears raised and his shoulders drooping, is scolded by different characters. Besides this play, there are many traditional dramas, such as Shi Shu's mother scolding Cao Cao, Zhuge Liang scolding Cao Cao, Empress Fu scolding Cao Cao, and so on. In traditional dramas, white-faced figures are treacherous, suspicious, cruel, and shrewd. Therefore, most negative historical figures have white faces on the stage. Cao Cao is typically presented as a white-faced figure. The Jianghua River is rushing. There are 72 mounds on the banks of the river. Mi Hung's tomb is small, and he sleeps forever on the Parrot Islet. These are lines from a poem written in the Qing Dynasty. The 72 mounds refer to the 72 decoy tombs on the banks of the Jianghua River. In the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the last sentence Cao Cao said before his death was to set up 72 tombs to serve as decoys and to protect against tomb robbers.
"可能当时有个民间传说，说祈祷是关于72中的事，但是并没有实质，并不说就是指的曹操。可是到写《三国演义》的时候，无论是罗贯中也好，或者是这之前的民间艺人也好，为了彰显曹操的多疑狡诈，把这72一中这个传说给安进去了。
This shows that no matter how clear the official historical records are, folklore and popular literature remain overwhelmingly powerful forces. In his Records of the Three Kingdoms, historian Chen Shou described Cao Cao as astute and calculating from a very early age. According to the biography of Cao Cao, as a young man, Cao Cao led an itinerant life and was addicted to hunting. Yet even this reputation didn't make him terribly frowned upon. The decisive blow came a millennium and a half later when Mao Zedong, who lived in the Qing Dynasty, branded Cao Cao #1 unscrupulous schemer. But why did he do so? Why was Cao Cao considered to be unscrupulous? In part, this has to do with a famous scholar named Xu Xiao, a contemporary of Cao Cao, well known for his acerbic comments and observations. It is said that Cao Cao visited him on several occasions, each time lavishing him with gifts. But Xu Xiao was not one to be won over, dismissing him as an unscrupulous conspirator. But that was in peacetime. In turbulent times, so Xu Xiao maintained, Cao Cao was just the sort of man that was needed. But the interpretation clashes with the one presented in Luo Guanzhong's Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Here, Cao Cao was presented as a capable official, good at governing the country in peacetime. It's only in chaotic times that he lost his scruples. As the novel grew in popularity, so this version of Cao Cao's personality took hold. Nevertheless, important though these perspectives were in shaping the public perception of Cao Cao, on their own, they were not enough to transform Cao Cao from an outstanding historical personality into a maligned conspirator. It took another controversial incident to do that. In 189, the capital Zhuge Liang fell under the control of warlord Dong Zhuo and his troops from Liangzhou, forcing Cao Cao to flee for his life. It was this disaster that culminated in an incident that forever tarnished his reputation.
三国演义》当中写了非常知名的一个故事，就是《三国演义》曹操逃出洛阳和陈宫最后杀吕伯奢这个故事。而且在杀了吕伯奢以后，最后他跟陈宫分道扬镳了。原因就是什么？原因就是曹操说的：“宁可我负天下人，绝不天下人负我。”
In Romance of the Three Kingdoms, after escaping from Luoyang, Cao Cao and Chen Gong took refuge in the home of Lü Bo-shu's, a sworn brother of Chao's father. Ever the good host, Lü ordered his family to butcher a pig to treat them, while he went to a nearby village to buy wine. Unnerved by the sound of the knife being sharpened outside, Cao Cao got it into his head that his hosts were out to kill him. Deciding to strike first, Cao Cao killed 8 members of the Lü household before turning on Lü when he arrived home with the wine. However, this incident was related by Chen Gong, according to whom, when asked why he killed the Lü family, Cao Cao replied, "I'd rather betray others than have others betray me." But there's a problem. However bloodthirsty this episode makes him sound, it's not in line with historical facts. Firstly, Chen Gong never fled with Cao Cao. Secondly, records of the Three Kingdoms, written by Chang Shu, made no mention of this incident.
正史是那个几个流氓想杀曹操，想捉曹操，曹操先下手为强，这是正当防卫。文学家都认为，他这一个故事啊，在中国古典文学史上最为精彩的一篇，所以说来的一下把曹操打到18层地狱，永远翻不了身。但是呢，这是个演绎，小说。
Any judgment of a historical figure must be based on his merits and demerits. So what's the reality behind the white painted face? What was the real Cao Cao like? According to Chen Shou, Cao Cao was an extraordinary person. Sima Guang also positively appraised Cao Cao, remarking on his perspicacity and how difficult to deceive him. Indeed, so perceptive and insightful was he that his ability to spot talent beneath the rough and ready manners of people of humble origins was legendary, hence his famous edict entitled Seeking Men of Talents. Elsewhere, Cao Cao argued that the basic approach to selecting officials should be to favor men of virtue in times of peace, while capable men of action should be preferred in times of chaos. In the Battle of Guandu, despite being heavily outnumbered, Cao Cao defeated Yuan Shao. Quite apart from demonstrating his mastery of strategy and tactics, this battle highlighted another aspect of Cao Cao's personality, his tolerance. In the aftermath of the battle, letters were found among the captured books and papers. They were peace overtures from officials in Shudu, attempting to curry favor with Yuan Shao, the overwhelming favorite in the upcoming battle. When someone suggested putting them to death for treason, Cao Cao said, "As Yuan Shao was at his peak, it was even difficult for me to survive, let alone these people." Cao Cao had all the letters burned without reading them.
从这里，我们实际上体会到的是曹操的雄才大略的另外的一面，那就是曹操他知道，如果他把这些信不烧掉，而一封一封的拆开来看，那会是一种什么样的结果呢？
Nevertheless, generally speaking, later commentators have been reluctant to see Cao Cao's actions in a positive light. Far from being evidence of his tolerance, ulterior motives have been cited to explain Cao Cao's behavior. As Qing Dynasty scholar Zhao Yi put it, while Liu Bei, Sun Tzu, and Sun Quan depended on personal qualities to win people over, Cao Cao resorted to political trickery. The era of three kingdoms was no doubt a turbulent age. From the perspective of Confucianism, both Cao Cao, who manipulated the emperor, and Sun Quan, who ignored the imperial court of the Han Dynasty, were traitors without honor. Conversely, Liu Bei, who had the blood of the Han Dynasty imperial family running through his veins, epitomized legitimacy. What's more, his claim to the throne was strengthened by his policy of tolerance and benevolence. Little wonder, then, that Cao Cao, with his penchant for violence and manipulation, came to be seen in a negative light. Certainly Cao Cao's two attacks against Xuzhou in 193 and 194 demonstrated little of the mildness witnessed after the Battle of Guandu. On capturing the city from Taoqian, Cao Cao sacked the city, massacring hundreds of thousands in the process. However, there are those who argue that far from being typical of Cao Cao's modus operandi, his behavior on this occasion was exceptional. In mitigation, this school of thought points out that Cao Cao's father had died at the hands of Taoqian, and his understandable desire for revenge got the better of him. Whatever the reason, the fact remains that he was responsible for the massacre. It's been a black mark against his name ever since. Nor was it an isolated incident. 5 years later, after the Battle of Guandu, the decisive encounter between Cao Cao and Yuan Shao, his brutal side was seen again. While he was busy forgiving his wavering officials, 80,000 captured enemy troops were being buried alive. In his defense, other historians point to the historical context. Brutal incidents of that kind were all too common in those days. Sun Quan, Sima Yi, as well as other leaders, committed atrocities of one kind or another. The reality is that era of the three kingdoms was a turbulent age. If anything, it's Liu Bei who is the exception. Despite the chaos and violence of those years, mercy and righteousness shone through in all that he did. This might explain his success. These qualities rallied both scholars and the common people behind him and encouraged other warlords to ally with him. Whatever the excuses, the fact remains that Cao Cao committed these acts of brutality. Another issue is the legitimacy of the Wei regime. The Romance of Three Kingdoms takes it for granted that of all the contending states, Shu was the legitimate one. From the point of view of the novel, the text that has played the strongest role in defining attitudes to Cao Cao and the rest. Wei and Wu were rebel states. Those who led and fought for them were traitors. Not, of course, that all writers and historians have agreed. On the contrary, Zhen Shu's records of the Three Kingdoms considers Wei to be legitimate. Meanwhile, the story of Han and Jin favors Shu. Later in the Northern Song dynasty, Sima Guang indirectly acknowledged Wei's legitimacy by using its chronology in his comprehensive mirror to aid in government. During the Southern Song dynasty, in A Detailed Outline of Comprehensive Mirror to Aid in Government, Zhu Xi used Wei's chronology for that of the Shu state, explicitly labeling Cao Cao a usurper. Towards the end of the Yuan dynasty, historians were ordered to compile the history of the Song, Liao, and Jin dynasties. Famous poet Yang Weizhen submitted a memorial to the throne, expressing his idea about the legitimacy of regimes. He wrote that all right-thinking people from earlier dynasties had regarded Shu as the legitimate successor to the Han dynasty. Though it was short-lived and was located in a remote area, it had the superior moral claim.
尊刘贬曹也好，尊曹贬刘也好，我的基本的看法，这是一种历史的诡辩，而不是历史的本质。是古代的这个学者也好，历史学家也好，包括这个当时的这个当权者也好，都是根据他们当时的时事的需要，在变换的说法，不是历史的本质。
Is it possible to form an objective judgment of Cao Cao? That's a very difficult thing for historians to do. He was an extraordinary mixture, smart and cunning, forthright and ruthless, sometimes treating heroes generously, at other times breaking men of talent. And brutal though he could be, he wasn't a cruel man. He took no pleasure in killing. Take, for example, the massacre at Xuzhou. Far from glorying in this atrocity, he wrote a poem expressing his profound regret and sympathy for those who have to live through such turbulent times. Ungathered bones strew the wilderness. For thousands of miles, not a rooster to be heard. 1/10 of the populace may have survived. What a heartbreaking disaster. According to the records of the Three Kingdoms, when Dongzhuo died, each prefecture had hundreds of thousands of households. During the following 10 years, thanks to incessant wars, most people were forced to flee. Taking their cattle and farming implements with them, they farmed when and where they could, and fought when they had to. Nobody knows for sure how many perished. All anybody can say for sure is that as chaos reigned, death stalked the land. As Cao Cao himself wrote, almost all the people in his homeland had died, leaving him heartbroken. In 196, Cao Cao accepted the suggestion to implement the Tuntian system, or the military agriculture colony system, in Xujiang. He was the first warlord to do so. In the process of suppressing the rebel army, Cao Cao obtained a large number of soldiers, civilians, cattle, and large areas of land. He then issued an order, stipulating that refugees should be organized into groups of 50. They had to farm in spring and summer, and receive military training in autumn and winter. That same year, Xujiang had a great harvest. Though this system involved forced labor and was exploitative, experience in Xuchang demonstrated that it was an effective way of restoring agricultural production in northern China. It also ended the separation of farmers from their land caused by the war. Instead of having to flee to avoid wars, the ordinary people could now settle down and concentrate on farming. Farmers were again attached to the farmland, and their living standard was hugely improved. This system had another ramification. As food is the most important necessity for people, they would follow whoever could feed them. As Cao Cao watched the green shoots spring up across his war-torn land, it's easy to imagine what a beautiful sight it was to him.
"在那样一种非常混乱的割据的情况下，有谁能够把政治带回到引入到正轨的轨道？这个人就是名副其实的杰出的政治家。其实我们从现在发生的史实来看，这个人其实就是曹操。
曹操绝对不是一个战争狂，他是要治天下太平的。但是当时军阀混战，大家都在打，怎么样遏制这场战争？曹操就是一暴一暴，用战争遏制战争，这才是他的一个选择。在这样一个背景下，他是没办法的。所以曹操是个战争的亲历者，他又是战争哀歌的歌唱者。
Without doubt, Cao Cao's historical reputation has been damaged by his usurpation of power. Even if he didn't crown himself, historians have been reluctant to let him off the hook. In 220, not long after his death, officials submitted a memorial to Emperor Jian of Han jointly, suggesting that the emperor abdicate and hand over the throne to Cao Pi, Cao Cao's son. In October that year, the emperor abdicated in favor of Cao Pi. Today, in Fancheng Town, 17 kilometers southwest of Xuchang, Henan Province, the site of the platform where Cao Pi accepted the throne can still be found. 2 stone tablets engraved with the inscriptions of acceptance of the emperor's abdication and request for acceptance of the throne are still preserved in the temple beside the platform. These stone tablets bore witness to how Wei replaced the Han Dynasty. Bei Songjue wrote that Cao Pi ascended to the throne, and tens of thousands of ministers, generals, and ethnic group leaders attended the ceremony. He honored his father, Cao Cao, as Emperor Wu. The Eastern Han Dynasty that lasted for 195 years and experienced 12 emperors finally came to an end. The Three Kingdoms era had begun. Tragically, as the most outstanding politician of the Three Kingdoms era, Cao Cao has been the focus of controversy for more than 1,000 years. What makes this question especially complicated is the interplay between historical reality and the image of Cao Cao in literature. Just as Cao Cao dealt the Han Dynasty a fatal blow, so the legacy of that dynasty dealt his reputation a fatal blow. In light of the Confucian orthodoxy that reached its height during the Han Dynasty and proved so influential in subsequent Chinese history, Cao Cao could only be seen as a usurper. Despite his undoubted achievements, he was bound to be seen as an unscrupulous schemer. I draw east to Mount Jiashu to behold the dark green sea, water spreading fast and calm. Craggy islands surge and loom. Cao Cao wrote after crushing the northern warlords and conquering the Han people. We can only imagine the pride and satisfaction he must have felt after these achievements. His great predecessors, Qin Shi Huang and Emperor Wu of Han, had also come to Mount Jiashu. 1700 years later, Mao Zedong remarked that Cao Cao was an outstanding politician and military leader, as well as an excellent poet. He also remarked that Cao Cao united northern China and established the Wei regime, reforming many unreasonable policies of the Eastern Han Dynasty, suppressing local tyrants, restoring the economy, and bringing stability and development to the people. Shouldn't these achievements be acknowledged? His image as an unscrupulous schemer in people's mind was largely the result of the rigid feudal mindset of the authors of the books and dramas that have shaped public perceptions of this extraordinary leader.
我原来在许昌，我刚毕业的时间，许昌开过一次全国的建安文学学术研讨会。当时有人就提议，在许昌塑一个曹操像，塑在哪儿呢？塑在火车站。结果很多人反对，为什么呢？曹操是个奸臣呐，人家外地人来许昌了，一看许昌都是奸臣，这就说明当时呀，连许昌人对曹操的评价都很低。
Things have changed a lot since then. Nowadays, there are many statues of Cao Cao. Whatever we might think of his methods, there's no doubt he was the greatest politician, military leader, and littérateur of that era, a man whose historical achievements deserve recognition and commemoration. But it's unlikely that the white-faced image of Cao Cao, so deeply rooted in people's hearts, will be overthrown anytime soon. For a long, long time to come, Cao Cao will remain the most controversial figure from the world of the Three Kingdoms.